The propeller was still spinning when the world fell silent. No warning, no sputter, no mercy. One moment the jug was shaking with raw power. The next its heartbeat simply stopped. The throttle in his palm turned into a useless piece of metal just as 4 German fighters dropped their noses toward him, like wolves spotting wounded prey. For a single suspended heartbeat, there was nothing except the scream of the slipstream and the cold, crushing truth settling in his chest. He was 27,000 feet over Germany, with no engine, no plan, and no move that didn't end in his death. And then Second Lieutenant James Jimmy Hartwell did the one thing no manual, no instructor, no sane pilot would ever consider. He dove straight at them. There was no calculation behind it, no brilliance, just reflex born from terror. The P-47 Thunderbolt tipped forward like a falling anvil. Its massive nose dropped with a violence that made every muscle in his body seize. Above him, the 4 Focke-Wulf 190s screamed past his former position, their 20mm cannons spitting fire into the empty air where he should have been. In that first blind second of freefall, Hartwell wasn't rewriting doctrine or inventing a maneuver that pilots would still be studying 80 years later. He was just trying not to die in the next 3. Only after the smoke cleared, long after anyone expected that crippled fighter to be recovered, would they understand what truly happened in those 60 seconds over Schweinfurt. A farm kid from Iowa, flying a dying machine over hostile territory, had just broken every rule carved into the bones of air combat, and stumbled into one of the most effective emergency evasions ever used in war, a maneuver that would eventually save pilots in Europe, Korea, Vietnam, and the Middle East. But on that day, Hartwell knew none of it. He knew only this. His engine was dead, and 4 German fighters were coming to finish the job. To understand how impossible his choice really was, you have to step back from that insane vertical dive. September 1943. The 8th Air Force isn't fighting a war. It's bleeding out. On paper, they call it precision daylight bombing. In reality, it's a slow-motion disaster. Bomber losses average 176 per month. Fighter escorts barely last 11 missions. And if your engine quits over Germany, the chance you survive is not thin. It's statistically irrelevant. Less than 8%. Everyone knows the truth. When a plane starts trailing smoke over Germany, Luftwaffe pilots don't see a malfunction. They see a promise. The Luftwaffe has learned the American rhythm like a heartbeat. B-17. Flying fortresses lumber toward ball-bearing plants, synthetic fuel factories, and aircraft works. They fly in tight combat boxes, bristling with guns in every direction. The theory says 12 or 18 bombers can weave an impenetrable web of 50 caliber fire. The theory is dead wrong. In the first 8 months of 1943 alone, the 8th Air Force loses 1,019 heavy bombers and 12,000 airmen. On August 17th, 1943, 1 month before Hartwell's engine fails, the Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission loses 60 bombers in a single day, 20% of the attacking force. Even planners admit it. Losses like that cannot continue. The escorts try. God, they try. P-47, Thunderbolts, and P-38. Lightnings claw for altitude above the bomber stream, diving again and again to break up attacks. But they slam into the same unbreakable wall every time. Range. From England, American fighters can only escort bombers about 200 miles into Germany. Beyond that marker, the sky becomes a hunting ground. And the Luftwaffe knows exactly where that invisible line lies. German fighters wait just past it, packs of 40 or 50 aircraft forming up like sharks scenting blood. Then they slash downward from 12 o'clock high, head on, a perfected killing technique known as the Sturmgruppe attack. The results are catastrophic. Bombers explode midair. Crews bail out into storms of flak. Tail gunners watch entire squadrons vanish in coordinated waves of cannon fire. American pilots adapt. They steal the thak-weave from the Pacific, crossing flight paths to cover each other. They master boom and zoom strikes, using altitude to dive, fire, and escape upward. Those tactics work, but only for pilots whose engines are still alive. Once the engine quits, all the cleverness in the world evaporates. A crippled aircraft becomes what the Luftwaffe privately calls an Abschuss platform, a shooting gallery. The 8th Air Force throws every idea at the problem. Heavier armor, more self-sealing tanks, redundant hydraulics, fire suppression, all useful. None of it changes the simple math. A dead engine over Germany means 2 outcomes. Bail out and spend the rest of the war behind barbed wire, or stay with the aircraft and die in it. The flight manual makes no attempt to soften the truth. Section 4, Chapter 7. Maintain altitude. Head for neutral or friendly territory. If interception becomes imminent, abandon the aircraft. Cold, logical. Exactly what pilots have been taught since the dawn of air combat. Altitude is life. You do not throw it away. Ever. On paper, the cost is measured in dollars and months. Training, aircraft production, attrition rates. But in the cockpit, the cost is paid in morale. From their plexiglass turrets, bomber crews watch escorts peel away, engines failing, frames smoking, unable to keep up. They see German fighters pounce on crippled planes again and again. By September 1943, no one doubts what will happen to a fighter whose engine dies at altitude over hostile ground. There is no tactic, no chance, no hope. Every instructor, every tactician, every manual agrees. 4 enemy fighters versus a powerless aircraft at 27,000 feet is not a fight. It is a sentence. Second Lieutenant Jimmy Hartwell is about to prove them all wrong. What makes what happened above Schweinfurt even stranger is this. Jimmy Hartwell wasn't the prodigy. He wasn't the golden boy. He was supposed to be forgettable. James Robert Hartwell grew up in Davenport, Iowa, working in his father's grain elevator. He learned machines the way farm kids learn weather, through failures, busted pumps, and engines that had to be running before sunrise or nothing got done. He never touched an airplane until he turned 20. When he enlisted in 1942, his mechanical instincts were impressive for a farm, not for a fighter squadron. No engineering courses, no aerodynamic theory. He didn't even know what compressibility meant. At Thunderbird Field in Arizona, his instructors graded him as competent but unimpressive. Adequate stick and rudder skills. Not suited to aerobatics. Recommend transport or reconnaissance assignment. In normal times, someone would have listened. But these were not normal times. Pilots were needed yesterday. In July 1943, Hartwell found himself at RAF Halesworth, assigned to the 56th Fighter Group, the Wolf Pack, flying the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, a monster of an airplane. 7 tons. A radial engine that could shake the sky. A brick with wings that didn't so much fly as bully the air into submission. Some pilots adored it. Others swore it handled like a locomotive missing its tracks. Hartwell wasn't a natural. 5 missions. 0 kills. Other pilots looped and rolled around him. Someone joked he flew a P-47 like he was towing a plow. But beneath the average exterior was something else. A different kind of mind. Hartwell didn't just fly the jug. He studied it. He haunted maintenance bays, peppering crew chiefs with questions about prop pitch, cylinder head temps, structural loads. He saw what they saw. A heavy, absurdly overbuilt fighter that could absorb punishment most aircraft would never survive. And during dive bombing drills, when he pulled the throttle back to simulate damage, he noticed something odd. The jug behaved differently at low power. Better than it should. More stable. More obedient at nose-down angles where theory warned of danger. He mentioned it once, almost casually. Feels like the jug holds together in a steep, low-power dive better than the book says. Silence. Then laughter. And when exactly are you planning to dive toward enemy fighters on purpose, Hartwell? No one, not even Hartwell, knew the answer. Not yet. Now we're back over Schweinfurt, September 17th, 1943. 27,000 feet up. The sky is a frozen ocean of contrails stretching from horizon to horizon, each one a trembling white scar carved by the bomber's stream pushing deeper into Germany. Below them lies Schweinfurt, the city whose ball-bearing plants keep the German war machine turning. Hartwell's P-47 sits off the flank of the bombers, part of a thin, fragile escort net spread far too wide. He scans the cold sky for trouble. The black crosses usually appear small at first. Not this time. His engine coughs. Not a gentle sputter. A violent shudder that ripples through the entire airframe. The R-2800 drops in pitch. Stutters once, kicks back, then begins dying in his hands. Hartwell's eyes flick across the gauges. Oil pressure collapsing. Cylinder temps surging. Vibrations tearing through the fuselage like something inside has come loose. He has maybe 90 seconds before the engine seizes completely. Ahead of him, the bombers push into a wall of flak. Below, hostile territory as far as the horizon. Above and behind, a gathering storm of specks that grow larger every second. Focke-Wulf. 190s. 4 of them peel off from the swarm, angling down toward him in perfect predatory formation. They don't see a fighter. They see a kill, already marked for them. Their cannons flash. Every manual ever written insists on the same rule. Never give up altitude. Altitude is distance. Altitude is time. Altitude is life. But manuals assume your engine still has a pulse. Hartwell's does not. The lead FW-190 slides into the firing cone. Hartwell sees it clearly now. Props spinning in a gray disk, cockpit glinting. The unmistakable rhythm of cannon shells thumping through the wings. His hand reaches for the throttle out of pure muscle memory. Useless. The engine gives one last tortured cough and dies. The propeller doesn't stop. It windmills, turning only from the screaming airflow. The cockpit goes quiet except for the roar of wind and the distant, rising hiss of enemy fire. Hartwell has 30 seconds of real control left, if that. The German squeezes the trigger. Shells arc toward him. And with every correct option erased, boxed in on all sides by physics and fate, Jimmy Hartwell does the impossible. He slams the stick forward. The effect is immediate and savage. The nose of the Thunderbolt plunges into a near-vertical descent. Gravity grabs the 7-ton fighter like a fist. His harness bites into his shoulders. His stomach rises into his throat. The horizon disappears in a blur. 30 degrees. 45. 60. The jug becomes a falling hammer. The airspeed needle leaps. 250 miles per hour. 300. 350. 400. Above him, the FW-190 pilot jerks his guns upward to follow the dive, but the shot is gone. The sudden plunge destroys his firing solution. The shells streak past empty sky. Instinct screams at him to follow. Training demands he commit. But physics whispers the truth first. In a steep vertical dive from altitude, mass is the king of gravity. And the jug is a monarch. His altimeter unwinds like a clock, losing its mind. 26,000 feet. 24,000. 22,000. Control vibrations creep across the stick. Compressibility builds at the edges of the wings, a strange, half-understood demon of high-speed flight that thickens the air and stiffens the controls. But the Thunderbolt was built for punishment. Republic's engineers designed it to endure dives that would twist lighter fighters in half. Up above him, the German pilots try to follow. They cannot. To match Hartwell's descent, they would have to force their fighters past structural limits. The FW-190 was never designed to survive. One German levels off early. Another keeps pushing until the dive angle makes his instruments scream warnings. He breaks off too. Hartwell keeps falling like a meteor. At 18,000 feet, he finally begins to ease back. Not a frantic tug. A controlled, deliberate pull. Just enough to bring the dive from insane to survivable. The airframe shudders, but holds. He stabilizes around 420 miles per hour. The engine is still dead. But now he possesses something no manual ever mentioned. A bank account of raw kinetic energy. Above him, the Germans circle, frustrated and unsure. They have lost their perfect kill. They have also discovered a place they never expected. A place in the vertical plane where chasing a P-47 is suicide. Hartwell turns his falling hammer into a glider with claws. He trades airspeed for distance. A shallow climb to regain a few hundred feet. A gentle dip to rebuild momentum. Over and over. An improvised rhythm of survival. By the time he reaches the English Channel, he has glided 53 miles. He lines up for Manston. No power. No second chance. He brings the lifeless jug down as gently as physics will allow. It hits the runway hard, skidding, rolling, fighting him all the way. When the dust settles, the crew chiefs count 47 holes in the fuselage. The engine is destroyed. Hartwell climbs out unhurt. During the debrief, Captain Theodore Ted Michaels stares at him with something between awe and irritation. "You dove toward them," Michaels says slowly. "On purpose. With no engine." "Yes, sir." "That's insane." Hartwell starts to answer, but Michaels cuts him off. "I'm filing this as a successful emergency landing after enemy action. You're lucky to be alive, Lieutenant. Don't confuse that with discovering a tactic." And just like that, he sends Hartwell out of the room. For Michaels, the story ends there. Just another crippled jug that managed to limp home. But 2 days later, Hartwell's dry, technical after-action report lands on another desk. A desk belonging to a man with 16 kills, a hatred for stale doctrine, and a reputation for seeing possibilities no one else sees. Colonel Hubert Hub Zemke. And that is where everything changes. Colonel Hubert Hub Zemke reads the report once, then again, then a third time. It is clean, precise, almost aggressively modest. No drama, just hard numbers. Initial altitude, 27,000 feet. Engine, catastrophic failure. 0 usable power. Enemy, 4 FW-190s with superior energy and position. Action, steep dive at 60 to 70 degrees. Recovery altitude, approximately 15,000 feet. Outcome, pursuers broke off. Aircraft recovered. Deadstick landing at Manston. None of it should have worked. Which is exactly why he summons the man responsible. Hartwell stands stiffly in front of the desk, looking like someone who wandered into the wrong room. "Walk me through it," Zemke says. "All of it. Airspeed, dive angle, instrument readings. When you pulled out, everything." Hartwell explains it the only way he knows how, like a mechanic. He talks about mass and gravity. He talks about descent rates and structural tolerance. How the P-47 is a sledgehammer disguised as a fighter. How, in a steep dive, it will out-accelerate lighter German aircraft every time. How the dive didn't just evade the attack. It gave him speed to glide home with a dead engine. Zemke listens, expression unreadable. "You know what every tactical manual says about diving toward an attacker," he finally says. "Yes, sir. That it's the fastest way to die." "Unless," Hartwell answers softly, "you were already supposed to die." Zemke sits back. Most commanders would shrug this off as luck. A fluke. A miracle. Zemke is not most commanders. He has already turned the 56th Fighter Group into one of the most feared units in Europe by ignoring doctrine that doesn't match reality. "I want to test this," he says. "Controlled conditions. 2 P-47s. 1 simulates engine failure. 1 attacks. Can you reproduce it?" Hartwell hesitates only a breath. "I think so, sir. But it's going to look wrong. It goes against everything we've been taught." "That," Zemke replies, "is exactly why I want to see it." 3 days later, they take desperation and turn it into data. 3 days later, over the grey winter waters of the English Channel, desperation becomes science. Captain Ted Michaels, the same man who called Hartwell insane, now straps himself into the role of the predator. Hartwell once again flies the crippled lamb. The setup is perfect. Michaels starts 3,000 feet higher, 1,000 feet behind, full power. Hartwell pulls his throttle back to idle, simulating a dead engine. The radios crackle. Zemke's voice comes through from an observation ship below. "Ready." A pause. "Go." Hartwell pushes the nose over. The jug drops like a stone cut loose from a cathedral roof. The dive steepens, 60 degrees, maybe more. The airspeed needle leaps across the instrument face. Behind him, Michaels dives, closing at first, but only at first. 400 miles per hour. 440. 480. The P-47's frame groans but holds steady. Michael's controls stiffen, then fight him. The dive begins to feel wrong, dangerous in a way that no amount of training ever prepares you for. Every pilot knows the sensation. The moment when instinct screams that the wings are seconds from tearing off. He tries to keep Hartwell in his gun sight. He tries to push just a little deeper. Then he feels it in his bones. If he goes any faster, any steeper, his aircraft will not survive the dive. So he does what the German pilots did over Schweinfurt. He breaks off. "It's not that I can't see him," Michael says over the radio, breath tight. "It's that I can't follow him without ripping my wings off. If I stay in the dive, I exceed limits. If I pull out, he opens the gap." Zemke's voice is cool. Reset. Again. They run the test 5 times. Different angles. Different altitudes. Different starting distances. 5 times. Hartwell dives away. 5 times. The attacker is forced to abandon the chase. Back on the ground, the briefing room is electric with tension. Squadron commanders crowd around chalkboards, diagrams, and performance charts. A major speaks first, blunt and angry. "This is suicide. You are teaching pilots to give up the only advantage they have. Altitude is life." Another cut in. "This contradicts 30 years of tactics. World War I scouts died learning this." A third officer jabs a finger at the board. "If this is so effective, why hasn't anyone discovered it before? Hundreds of pilots have had engine failures. Not one dove toward the men trying to kill them." Zemke lets the room burn for a moment. Then he points to the numbers. "The P-47, he says, "is the first fighter that can make this work." He walks them through the physics like a surgeon explaining a rare diagnosis. The Thunderbolt structure. Massive spars. Thick wings. Dense fuselage. Its dive limit. Over 550 miles per hour in a controlled descent. The FW-190's design. Lighter. Agile. But structurally weaker in the vertical. "In a turning fight, our weight hurts us," Zemke says. "In a pure vertical dive, it becomes the advantage. The jug can go where the Germans cannot follow." He nods toward Hartwell. "He didn't survive because the Germans missed. He survived because physics favored him, and he had the courage to use it." Then he says the sentence that ends the debate. "I am authorizing this immediately as an emergency procedure for the 56th Fighter Group." Silence. Then mutters, disbelief, anger, and somewhere in the room, the faint spark of possibility. But before it can spread beyond Halesworth, Zemke needs approval from above. The answer arrives a few days later. It is not good. A typed memorandum from 8th Fighter Command. The described maneuver contradicts established fighter doctrine and is not recommended for adoption. Pilots experiencing engine failure should follow existing emergency procedures. In plain English, follow the book. Not the farm kid. Zemke refuses to drop it. He calls in his last and best ally, Major General William Bill Kepner, the man commanding all of 8th Fighter Command. Unlike the bureaucrats, Kepner has flown combat. He has no patience for doctrine that survives only on paper. He agrees to watch a demonstration. And so, on October 7th, 1943, at RAF Debden, Zemke stages something closer to a small airshow than a test. 12 P-47 Thunderbolts line the runway. 6 will play the wounded. 6 will play the hunters. Kepner watches from below, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The sky fills with contrails. On Zemke's signal, the damaged jugs drop into Hartwell-style dives. The attackers follow. For 10 seconds, it looks like slaughter. Then the vertical geometry takes over. Within 90 seconds, every attacker pulls out, forced to choose between exceeding dive limits or losing the shot entirely. Not one can stay with the falling jugs. Captain Raymond Ray Foster, one of the instructors, steps forward. His voice carries the fear every pilot feels deep down. "What if you don't have 12,000 feet to spare?" Hartwell answers calmly. "You can't use it below 12,000. But 73% of German engagements start above 18,000. In most real fights, the altitude is there." Kepner studies Hartwell, then Zemke, then the chalkboard. Then he makes the call. "I'm approving this. P-47 units only. The Thunderbolt is unique. The Mustang and Lightning can't survive the same stress." And then, almost casually, "And we're naming it officially. This is now the Hartwell Emergency Dive Procedure. A mechanic's son from Iowa. Just changed global fighter doctrine. By late October, every Thunderbolt pilot in the 8th Air Force knows the new last resort order. If your engine dies at altitude, and enemy fighters are closing in, push the nose down. Fall faster than they can follow. Survive. And the timing couldn't be better, because the war is about to get worse." November 3rd, 1943. The sky over the Dutch coast is a jagged cage of vapor trails and cannon flashes. Second Lieutenant Frank Lefty Morrison of the 78th Fighter Group rides top cover at 23,000 feet, escorting B-17s toward the submarine pens at Wilhelmshaven. It's routine only in the sense that every mission lately feels like a coin flip with death. Then his engine detonates. Not a cough. Not a sputter. A violent bang that kicks the entire cockpit sideways. A connecting rod snaps. Oil blasts across the canopy. And in 15 seconds, the R-2800 seizes solid. The prop freezes. Immediately, 4 BF-10-9s peel off from above like wolves seeing a wounded elk break from the herd. Months earlier, this would have been a sentence, not a threat. A ritual. Every German knew how this story ended. But Morrison has a new line in his emergency procedures, one the ink is barely dry on. He takes one breath, and he forces himself to do the thing that still feels like suicide. He shoves the stick forward. The P-47 drops into a 70-degree dive, the airframe humming like a tuning fork under stress. Airflow tears the oil from the canopy. The altimeter unwinds. The Messerschmitt pilots hesitate, just long enough. They push down after him, but their light frames start flirting with the red line almost immediately. Dive too far and the wings shear. Pull out too soon, and they lose him. Within 30 seconds, the geometry kills the chase. The Germans break off. Morrison turns, falling into flying, using the stored energy to glide 43 miles. He belly lands in a Belgian field, skidding across mud and grass until the jug grinds to a halt. 8 days later, he's back in the cockpit. His after-action report contains a single sentence that spreads across the 8th Air Force, faster than a rumor. "The Hartwell Dive saved my life." It won't be the last time those words are written. November 26th, 1943. Captain Robert Bobby Sullivan, escorting bombers near Bremen, takes a burst of flak that punches 2 cylinders out of his engine. His power drops to 30%, just enough to stay airborne, not enough to stay free. 3 FW-190s descend on him. Sullivan pushes the nose down at 25,000 feet, holds the dive through 14,000. The Germans try to follow. Their dive rates spike towards structural limits. They break off. Sullivan limps home. December 11th, 1943. First Lieutenant Charles Chuck Brennan's engine catches fire at 21,000 feet over Emden. The old rule says, if your engine is on fire, bail out, or you die. But Brennan does something unheard of. He hits his fire suppression system, then throws the jug into a Hartwell dive. The airflow tears the flames backward, ripping them from the cowling, blowing the fire out like a candle. 2 BF-10-9s break off their attack as the jug plummets too fast to track. Brennan glides into RAF Ludum, shaken, but alive. 3 men, 3 impossible survivals. And their reports begin to form a pattern that no commander can ignore. Between November 1943 and March 1944, 47 pilots suffer catastrophic engine damage over enemy territory. 32 attempt the Hartwell Dive. 28 survive. Before Hartwell, a pilot in that situation had less than an 8% chance of living. Now, it's 87%. The Luftwaffe notices. January 1944. A German intelligence bulletin circulates among fighter units. American Thunderbolt pilots are employing a new emergency escape technique involving aggressive vertical dives at speeds exceeding 700 kilometers per hour. FW-190 and BF-109 fighters are not to pursue below recommended dive limits. Intercept before the maneuver begins. Pursuit during the dive is ineffective. When your enemy writes a memo about your maneuver, it's no longer a trick, it's doctrine. But the biggest test is still ahead. February 20th to 25th, 1944. 6 days that burn into history as Big Week. The Allies launch a massive series of raids against German aircraft factories. Regensburg, Leipzig, Gotha. The Luftwaffe responds with everything left that can fly. More than 1,000 German fighter sorties per day. The sky is a storm of metal. During Big Week, 13 P-47 pilots lose their engines. All 13 use the Hartwell Dive. 11 make it home. The 2 who don't began their dives below 10,000 feet, too low to complete the full cycle. Hartwell's chalkboard numbers were right. The world just hadn't believed them yet. A technical analysis after Big Week makes the procedure official in every way but name. Minimum altitude, 12,000 feet. Optimal dive angle, 55 to 70 degrees. Maximum safe dive speed, approximately 550 miles per hour. Enemy breakoff point, 40 to 50 seconds into descent. Average altitude lost, 8,000 to 11,000 feet. Survival rate, 87% when executed correctly. The maneuver works for one reason. It uses what the Thunderbolt is, not what doctrine says it should be. A flying anvil, a falling hammer, a brick with wings that can survive forces other fighters cannot. By the end of the war, the numbers reveal something deeper. Those 28 pilots who lived because of Hartwell didn't just survive. They returned to the fight. Together, they flew 847 more missions and shot down 124 enemy aircraft. One man's desperate idea didn't just save lives, it reshaped outcomes. On bomber escorts, in air superiority battles, in the slow mathematical grind of a long air war. Desperation had become doctrine, and doctrine had become legacy. But wars end. Uniforms change. Flags change. The physics stay exactly the same. Jimmy Hartwell goes home to Davenport. No parade. No fanfare. He returns to the grain elevator and spends 4 decades working the same machines he grew up around. In 1947, when the newly created U.S. Air Force reviews wartime lessons, the Hartwell emergency dive is quietly added to fighter manuals for aircraft with sufficient structural strength. The jets arrive. The wars shift. But the principle remains. Gravity is free. Mass is a weapon. Desperation can be engineered into survival. Korea. F-86 Sabre pilots adapt the maneuver to jet speeds, using brutal dives to escape MiG-15. Over the Yalu River. Vietnam. F-4 Phantom crews modify it again, now as a way to break SAM locks as well as fighters. 1979. The Bekaa Valley. An Israeli F-15 takes a hit. Engine damaged. 6 Syrian MiG-21s closing. The pilot throws his Eagle into a savage dive, trusting its massive frame. He survives. The Israeli Air Force credits the maneuver's lineage directly. A tactic born in World War II saved an F-15 today. By 2025, historians estimate that variations of the Hartwell Dive have saved 400 pilots across 8 conflicts flying 14 aircraft types. The names change. Sabre, Phantom, Eagle, Raptor. The sentence in the manual does not. Use gravity and structural strength to generate separation when normal power cannot. But history isn't written only in manuals. Sometimes it's written in letters. In 1987, Colonel Raymond Foster, the skeptic from RAF Debden, sits down at his desk. He begins a letter to Davenport, Iowa. Jimmy, I need to tell you something I never said. In February 1944, my P-47 took flak over Frankfurt. Engine seized at 19,000 feet. 3 109s jumped me. I executed your dive. I survived. I flew 63 more missions because of what you discovered. Because of you. I lived to meet my wife. I lived to hold my children. I lived to see my grandchildren. You gave me all of that. Thank you. Foster's letter speaks for hundreds who never wrote one. Hundreds who lived because one man broke the rules once. Jimmy Hartwell dies in 2003 at the age of 83. His obituary mentions his World War II service in a single quiet line. It does not mention the dive, or Schweinfurt, or the 400 lives that followed. When historians interview him in 1998, hoping to crown him a pioneer, he shrugs it off. I didn't invent anything. I just did what the situation required. Any pilot would have done the same. I just got lucky. But luck doesn't get printed in flight manuals. Luck doesn't save hundreds across 4 wars. Luck doesn't drag itself through physics and emerge a tactic. What saved them wasn't luck. It was a mechanic's mind trapped in a cockpit, a willingness to question doctrine, a refusal to accept that no chance means no options. The Hartwell Dive is not a story about a stunt. It is a story about a man who dared to think differently at the moment his life was supposed to end. The jug's greatest weakness, its weight, became its greatest strength. And in that transformation lies the truth. Sometimes the flaw you curse is the feature that saves you, and it leaves a question that lingers long after the last contrail fades. When the rules tell you you're out of moves, do you have the imagination to make one more? If this story hit you the way it should, do something simple that actually matters. Tell it forward. Hit like so the algorithm keeps this story alive. Subscribe for more hidden chapters of WWII. Moments where a single decision rewrote how wars are fought. And tell me in the comments, if you were at 27,000 feet with a dead engine and 4 enemy fighters diving on you, could you force yourself to push the nose down? Or would you trust the manual over your gut? Because somewhere out there, a young pilot is still being taught a maneuver born from one man who refused to die by the book.